World Affairs Roundup, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Doug Savage, Assistant Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM, with another edition of our World Affairs Roundup. Today we'll be looking at penalties for early withdrawal. Despite post-election gridlock that threatens to leave Iraq without a functioning government for months to come, President Obama said recently that U.S. troop withdrawal plans are on schedule. What are the likely impacts for Iraq's security if he sticks to the timeline, and for Obama's political future if he doesn't? Brown and out in Britain. With elections in the UK scheduled for May 6, PM Gordon Brown's Labour Party looks to be facing an uphill climb. Meanwhile, Nick Clegg, standard-bearer of the perennial also-ran Liberal Democrats, suddenly looks like a contender. What's on British voters' minds as they head to the polls? Greek tragedy. The Greek economic crisis has threatened to infect other countries in the Eurozone. How is the EU responding to Athens' slide towards insolvency? And battling in Bangkok. The weeks-long standoff between pro- and anti-government protesters in Thailand once again turned deadly this week. Who are the parties involved, and what's at stake for Thailand and the region if a peaceful solution can't be found? For a closer look at these stories and more, we're joined once again by John Katzka, a retired U.S. Foreign Service officer who has conducted public diplomacy for the Department of State on 4 continents. Ann Hamiliton, political scientist and coordinator of international studies at UW-Whitewater, who also served in the U.S. Foreign Service. And Robert Kraig, author of a number of articles and books dealing with the history and politics of American foreign policy. He currently serves as Executive Director of Citizen Action of Wisconsin. Well, welcome back, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's start in Iraq. John, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what is on the table currently in terms of the U.S. commitment for withdrawal and where the political situation stands right now.
Well, currently we have around 98,000 troops, mostly on bases, as I understand it. And the goal by August the 10th is to move down to 50,000. The question you raised in your opening was, can we live with this withdrawal? And I guess the easy answer is yes. I don't see any major stumbling blocks. The military has not come out and raised any obstacles, and they have subtle ways in which to get that information out. The only people who are contesting it are some former people who were involved in the Iraq issue, some of them with baggage of their own, but also there's always a reluctance to let the patient go when you're still treating them. So I think this is a case.
So, and what about the absence of functioning government? I mean, maybe you could say a few words about where we are in that process.
Well, they're still negotiating, and there are some. I think that last week one candidate was not one of the individuals who had won was actually disqualified because of his previous ties with the Ba'athist government, and so that reduced the lead to 1, I believe, by the Alawi's party, and there's still other cases pending, and there's a recount that's pending, so that when the plan to reduce the troops down to 50,000 was made, they thought that the election was going to be much sooner. They had factored in some time for this kind of negotiation, but it happened much later. So it looks like there won't be a government for quite some time. Hopefully, I mean, there's been violence, and hopefully they'll be able to minimize the violence. But I think that John's right. We're just going to have to do this, and there may or may not be a government in place at that time.
So how significant is that, Robert?
Well, obviously it's very significant that it's a huge problem for building a civil society there. On the plus side, though, there is a move away from sectarian parties. There is both of the leading parties actually are coalitions which are not based on religion, and so there seems like an opportunity down the road for building civil society. But the problem is the division between these two leaders, and it may be very personal, where neither leader will agree to be the second banana. And so the question is there enough depth in each of these parties to work around that and not let it come down to just these two leaders. But in the meantime, obviously it's problematic, but I don't think it's, I agree with John, it's not problematic for 50,000 troops versus 98,000 is not going to make a difference as far as the alleged stabilizing influence of our presence. But this does need to get worked out. Down the road, our eventual departure by 2011 may put more pressure on leaders in Iraq to actually resolve this issue. And so it may actually be positive if we hold off than this idea that we're never going to leave when we don't have to work things out ourselves as Iraqi leaders.
I mean, one of the problems I see with this sort of hung process is that it could degenerate, drift into a kind of no one in charge mentality, or it could break down into a multiplicity of small little single issue, very narrowly defined parties that will be battling with each other all the time. So there is, if this goes on too long, there are some real downsides to this.
Well, to that point, Megan O'Sullivan, who is President Bush's point person on Iraq, recently made the following statement. The last thing Iraqis really need is for the United States to be focused more on exit than on anything else at a moment of high political uncertainty. So what is that? I mean, do we still have capacity to manage that uncertainty she's talking about?
I don't agree with her.
Right.
I think that we need to stick to our plan. I don't think that by trying to engineer the results, even behind the scenes, that we'll end up doing ourselves any favors or the Iraqis any favors. I mean, obviously, we need to let the government know what we expect, and keep communication channels open. But to the extent that we're seen as trying to determine the result, it's not going to be helpful to us.
That would have made sense if this had come out maybe a year or two earlier when we were discussing whither we go. But once we've made the decision, when we start to go back and forth in terms of our communication to the Iraqis, we leave them confused as well.
Yeah, and I don't think that it affects the drawdown. It does need to be resolved. It's very important. I also think the decision has already been made that when President Obama ran on escalating in Afghanistan and pulling back in Iraq, he's committed. His escalation in Afghanistan has already challenged the progressive base in this country tremendously. If he was to stop the drawdown in Iraq, it would be disastrous for his presidency. So they're just going to have to make this work.
The liberal side of the country?
Progressive is the new liberal, John.
Well, let's turn now, if we could, to another situation where we may end up with an inconclusive result. Great Britain is going to have an election on May 6th. And maybe you could give us sort of a primer on the British electoral system so we know sort of the broad parameters of what's going on.
Well, it's a parliamentary system, so the leader of the country is the leader of the majority party in the parliament, in the legislature, and in essence what they're going to have is 650 individual elections, and it's a first-past-the-post or winner-take-all system. So in each of those elections, the front runner, just the first person past the post, or the one that gets one vote more than anybody else, wins the election. So it favors in order to win elections, you have to have geographic concentration of some sort. And in the past, that's really favored a two-party system, much as in the United States. But now we're in a rather unique situation in that it's rather rare in British politics, where the three parties look to be pretty evenly divided, with around 30% in the polls. And I assume from those polls, I actually thought of this just a few minutes ago, I assume from the polls I saw that they're polling within individual districts. Because if they aren't, then the polls don't mean very much. Because, for example, in 2001, when Labour won, they won 40% of the vote, but got 65% of the seats. And the Conservatives won 31% of the vote, and they got 25% of the seats.
So could you make a rough comparison with the Electoral College in our system, where the popular vote and the electoral vote may not exactly be the same?
Well, I think it is very similar, because in the sense that you could end up, in theory, with, if say, the Republicans won every single seat in our House of Representatives by one vote, which is in theory possible, they would have the entire House of Representatives, but in the popular vote they would be, they would have been just squeak, you know, very, very close. So, and that type of thing can happen in Britain, and that's what has assured this, accounts for this distortion in the difference between the proportion of the vote received nationally and the seats, the distribution of seats in the House of Commons.
And typically, I mean, the sort of evenly split vote has really been somewhat of a rarity in, certainly post-World War II British politics. Mm-hmm. What's different about this election?
Well, there have been major scandals affecting the Labour Party, plus their support for the Iraq War, which is very unpopular. The Tories were thought, after being out of power for a long time, to be on the come and have David Cameron, who is an energetic, newer, younger, fresher seeming leader, but he hasn't fully delivered on that. In fact, they still have a lot of baggage. They're still proposing a lot of medicine, like increasing the retirement age and reducing pensions, a lot of things that are very unpopular. And at the same time, the Liberal Democrats, which are a much larger third party than we have, but have been a minority party since the 1920s at least, have a dynamic candidate, and Nick Clegg just burst onto the scene in their first ever presidential debate, which they copied from us. Even though they invented parliamentary debate in England, they've learned the rhetorical presidency from us and done their own Kennedy Nixon. And so now it's thrown things into play. I mean, the last time the Liberal Democrats were powerful was when David Lloyd George was prime minister, when he was negotiating the League of Nations with Woodrow Wilson. That's how long ago it was. And so it's changed everything, but it's a different parliamentary system, as Ann was pointing out, than other parliamentary systems. It's winner take all in each of the parliamentary seats, just like our electoral college, which not constitutionally, but by the decision of individual states, is the winner takes all in most states. And in fact, there's actually a move in the United States for states to go around that and create a proportional representation system in the electoral college called national popular vote. A lot of people think that if the Liberal Democrats get a large vote, but they're denied much power in Parliament through the winner-take-all vote, that their price for joining a coalition government will be to change that system. And so this may lead to constitutional reform in England. That is one scenario here.
Well, you know, you start to wonder about how this could work. If you have an election, 650 of these elections, and someone has to win, and is it then that they have to win by a certain percentage, or, you know, otherwise there still is a winner, and you still have to total up all the winners, and it may still end up being, as we saw, getting 35% of the vote and getting 60% of the parliamentary delegations. And
there are a lot of different ways countries do this. You can add additional seats based on the percentage that the party gets. It doesn't all have to be geographic. I mean, England, by God.
Then it becomes non-representative.
Well, I mean, England used to have rotten boroughs where the seats had nothing to do with how many people were in the district.
But I think it's very complicated. I mean, you say there would be major reform, but a sequence doesn't leap to mind.
Probably wouldn't go as far as Israel, where it's completely proportional representative, so very small parties have the power. But there's a huge variety of parliamentary systems, and this debate, this whole prime minister campaign is helping us see that.
Yeah, and I think that the Lib Dems actually are there was the Liberal Party, but the Social Democrats broke off from the Labor Party after the 1979 strikes and all, because they thought that the Labor Party was too far to the left. And then they joined up with the Liberals in 1988. And in the beginning, they seemed to be very popular. They actually got a lot of support because they were the centrist party. But then the Labor Party moved to the center and sort of captured a lot of their territory. Now, if you look at the Lib Dem platform, it's actually not as much in the center, I would argue, from some of the details. And they talked about, I mean, they're really very pro-environment, all free education. I looked at their platform. It seems like, I don't know how they're going to finance the whole thing if they do end up winning. But anyway, it's interesting because now they've finally got a position to carve out for themselves, and it makes for a really fascinating election.
Well, we're going to have to just stay tuned and see the results on May 6th. But first, we'll take a short break and be right back on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus and our World Affairs Roundup. Well, I don't know if any of you were planning a vacation in the Parthenon this summer, but you could probably get some bargains.
Could be a hot time in the Parthenon.
Let's go to Greece. John, maybe you could tell us what is the economic situation there? Just how bad is it?
Well, a good way of starting to look at this issue is that often when the private sector, the private financial sector gets in trouble, the public sector can bail them out. And conversely, if the public sector gets in trouble, then the private sector, banks can help in terms of the financing of those obligations. But right now in Greece, we have both sectors are in deep trouble. It's the sovereign debt issue for the government, and it's the banking industry that has been clobbered as badly as any in Europe. So this is a conundrum for the Greeks.
Well, and Anne, how does this impact sort of the notion of the Eurozone, and that there were criteria to become a member that clearly Greece is no longer able to meet? So what do we do about it?
If they ever were able to meet them.
That's right. I think that they didn't spell out when they set up the euro ways to sort of exit from the Eurozone. And I know when they were setting it up that this was a concern, what was going to happen if something went really wrong like it is now. And I think that one of the major problems is that this sense of, John just alluded to it, that there's a sense of that they've been deceitful. I mean, because that they cooked the books, that they never were complying with the rules. And so why should the rest of Europe bail them out for something that really is of their own making? It sort of undermines all the trust in something that actually on paper looks like it's just, you know, technical economic stuff. But there is an issue of trust here. And so, and then there's the contagion issue as well, where they're afraid that, you know, other countries could be going under as well, particularly, I think, do they call them the pigs, with Portugal.
Or Club Med.
Portugal, Ireland, is it Italy and Spain? It's a really, really difficult issue, the fact that they don't have any exit strategy for states, and the amount that Greece needs keeps getting larger and larger, and not only now, but they're talking about 3 years out, so that the problem is really huge for the European economies.
And what have we seen in sort of near-term impacts just in the last several days?
Well, there have been stock market, gyrations in Europe and even in Wall Street one day over this. There's fear about the contagion. Greek's sovereign debt has been re-rated by Standard & Poor's as junk bonds in terms of their rating. It's caused tremendous problems in Germany, where Germany, by the formula of the bailout, would actually have to pay the bulk of it as the largest economy, and they're facing elections in May. It's clear that Greece hid this. And so there's a serious problem of trust there and moving forward. And there was no real exit strategy, right, as you pointed out, from the Eurozone when this was set up. And I mean, if Greece was to leave the euro, obviously they could devalue their currency, but it would cause all sorts of tremendous economic problems as well. So it's probably good for the dollar. It's probably good for the United States in a certain sense. Of course, it also risks, more financial instability globally, which is not in anyone's interest, including the United States, which is why the International Monetary Fund has been brought in, which took a lot of pride swallowing by the euro folks to allow the IMF to come in, because it admitted they couldn't fix the problem themselves.
And it's sort of a hybrid bailout, is it not?
Yes. So I mean, it's hard to understand how Greece can ever get out, grow enough, be a vibrant enough economy to get out of this debt. So this would seem to be a chronic problem no matter what.
Also the unwillingness of the Greeks to take on the kinds of social and institutional restructuring that's necessary to get them moving in the right direction. There's a sense of obligation
strikes
here.
And violence.
Well, exactly. I mean, let's look at what happened domestically in Greece in the run-up to this crisis, when they did try to enact some of these cost-cutting measures.
Yes, riots, demonstrations.
Protesters, police are coming out, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, you alluded to this, the situation in Germany, for example, which would be one of the big benefactors of any bailout, and its impact.
Benefactors, or
they would be the benefactors of Greece ponying up, and if you're Angela Merkel facing elections, how do you weigh that? How do you weigh your sort of Euro sensibilities versus just sort of basic political interests?
Well, the issue is that in short-term political terms, it's better not to be involved in a bailout of Greece. Public opinion's against it in Germany. On the other hand, if you allow them to become the Lehman Brothers of the international financial collapse, then you've caused a much worse problem that causes a lot more harm, and you'll be blamed for that as well. There'll be accountability for that. So.
And as you were alluding to, there's already increased scrutiny on Ireland, typically is mentioned, Portugal and Spain. So is this the beginning of a domino effect that that Angela Merkel or no other European leader wants to have hung around his or her neck?
Well, I think there are really serious problems in the other economies, and their ratings have also gone down when the Greek rating went down. So to the extent that the private investors are reluctant to invest in these economies because of these ratings, then it spirals out of control because there's nobody investing, so there's no solution.
This also brings up the question of whether we're in a V or a W recovery. And right now, the V has very strong impetus going forward, but this sort of thing can, I mean, if you went back and looked at the Great Depression, it wasn't just a V or a W, it was a up and down and up and down sort of thing. Every time people thought we would pass the corner, we found another crisis that we had to deal with.
Right.
Well, now let's move a bit further east, if we could, to
more demonstrations,
to your old stomping grounds and the situation in Bangkok. John, maybe you could give us a little background on who the parties are that are currently in conflict and how they got that way.
Well, let's go globally first and look at, this is, in many respects, the poor versus the elite. This is the rural parts of Thailand versus Bangkok. These are the have-nots going after the haves. And Thaksin, who was an incredibly multi-billionaire, is an unusual figure to be leading this group.
Leading the have-nots.
Leading the have-nots because but he was a populist, and he ran on the principle of redistributing some of this wealth.
So let's back up a little bit. He was
the prime minister from 2001 to 2006, and an army coup. They happened 3 times when I spent 5 years in Thailand in the early 70s, and there were 3 coups during that period of time that the army kept coming back into power. It's not an unusual thing in Thailand for that to happen. That the king has not become engaged in this, even he is ailing, but the king doesn't get involved until there is a solution.
So we're running a bit out of time. Let's fast forward to the current crisis. What brought this to a head?
we have first of all, there were the yellow shirts. These are the ones who were in favor of the existing order.
And we're happy to see Thaksin go.
Then the reds, the yellows are connected to the king because the yellow is the color for Monday, which is the day of birth of the king, who was very highly regarded. The reds has no significance in the color, it's just another color. And now, not only is this going on in Bangkok, it is spread out into the provinces as well.
So their position basically is post-coup, government is illegitimate, and Thaksin should be returned.
Thaksin should be brought in because he's going to be able to deliver for us the kind of country, the kind of government we want.
So, and
Thaksin is in exile. I believe he's got a position in the government of Cambodia, if that's...
Yes.
And so it's sort of an unusual situation because he's got a lot of influence, but there also have been court cases against him for shenanigans with his party
and his wife,
his wife, and also his company, which is a big communications company. But there's also a court case against the party of the is his name Agisit, who's in power right now. So although he's considered to be very honest, so it's a very complicated situation. And as John said, it seems to be, you know, instant replay almost.
Right. So Robert, you know, John referenced the several coups during his tenure. Is this business as usual in Bangkok, or is this something unusual?
I think it's even worse than usual, even by Thai standards. It is. They're on the verge of a civil war here. I mean, really, the originally the yellow shirts are the ones who originally used the taking to the streets tactic to get rid of the other government, and then the red shirts retaliated and have brought civil society to a standstill. And now there's a group called the multicolored shirts, which is protesting both and protesting the the protests basically, but. If there's no way to back around this, I mean, the yellow shirts actually fear this is a charismatic figure, that it's going to be like Marcos or maybe a Latin American charismatic leader, and so they can't tolerate bringing him back. But all the rural have-nots, as John called them, are very much behind bringing back the former prime minister. So I think it's a very difficult situation.
Another one to watch. We'll have to leave it there. To our viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,